The rain drummed against our kitchen window like impatient fingers, and I sat there watching my wife of 8 years deliver the performance of her lifetime. Nora stood in the doorway, mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Her hair was disheveled in that perfectly imperfect way that suggested genuine distress, and her voice trembled with just the right amount of shame and regret. "Grant, I need to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm outside. "Something happened tonight. I was drunk, and it didn't mean anything, but I can't live with myself if I don't tell you." I took a slow sip of my coffee, already cold from waiting. The ceramic mug felt solid in my hands, grounding me as I prepared to watch this elaborate charade unfold. 2 weeks. I'd known for 2 weeks, ever since Halden decided to brag about his conquest during our Monday morning project review meeting. The arrogant piece of work had actually winked at me while describing his weekend adventures with some married architect who couldn't get enough. "Sit down, honey," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. My voice carried none of the shock or devastation she was expecting. Instead, I sounded tired, which wasn't entirely an act. I was exhausted from carrying this knowledge, from watching her lie to my face every single day since Drew's revelation. Nora stumbled slightly as she made her way to the chair, and I noticed she'd been drinking. Her movements were just loose enough to sell the story she was about to tell. She'd probably had a few glasses of wine to work up the courage for this moment, or maybe to make the tears come easier. "I don't know how to say this," she began, wrapping her arms around herself. "We went to that new place downtown, the one with the rooftop bar. Jade thought it would be fun, said I needed to get out more." Jade Marin. Even hearing the name made my jaw clench. Nora's best friend since college, the woman who'd been in our wedding party, who'd eaten at our table countless times. The same woman who'd been systematically arranging my wife's infidelity for months, pocketing $200 for each successful alibi she provided. "Go on," I encouraged, leaning back in my chair. The papers I'd prepared were sitting in my briefcase, just 10 feet away in the hallway. My lawyer had done excellent work on short notice. "There was this man at the bar," Nora continued, fresh tears spilling over. "He bought us drinks, and he seemed nice. Charming, Jade left early because she had that conference call with the West Coast client, and I should have gone with her, but I didn't." The lies came so easily to her. Jade hadn't left early. According to the text messages I'd recovered from Nora's old phone, Jade had specifically orchestrated the evening to give Drew access to my wife. She'd even suggested the hotel. "I had too much to drink, Grant. Way too much. And when he offered to get me a cab, I said yes. But then..." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. "We ended up at his hotel room. I slept with him, Grant. I cheated on you with a complete stranger, and I hate myself for it." A complete stranger. That was the detail that almost made me laugh out loud. Drew Halden, senior project manager at Morrison & Associates, the man who'd been trying to undermine my position for the better part of a year. The same Drew who'd somehow gained access to my client portfolio and forwarded confidential information to our biggest competitor. Nothing about this was random, and Nora knew it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching across the table toward my hand. "It was a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. I love you, Grant. Only you. This doesn't change anything between us." I looked down at her outstretched hand, noting the slight tan line where her wedding ring should have been. She'd taken it off before going out tonight, probably slipped it into her purse the moment she left the house. Another small detail that revealed the premeditation behind her drunken mistake. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly, still not taking her hand. "I appreciate your honesty." The relief that flooded her face was almost painful to watch. She'd expected anger, accusations, maybe even violence. Instead, She was getting understanding and forgiveness, exactly what she'd hoped for. This confession was supposed to clear her conscience while keeping her marriage intact, a perfect solution to her guilty feelings. "Really?" she breathed. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm angry," I admitted, standing up slowly. "But not for the reasons you think." I walked to the hallway and retrieved my briefcase, taking my time with the combination lock. Behind me, I could hear Nora shifting in her chair, probably wondering what I was doing. When I returned to the kitchen, I set the briefcase on the table and opened it with deliberate care. "The thing about honesty, Nora, is that it requires truth," I said, pulling out the manila folder that contained her future. "And what you just told me was the most elaborate lie you've ever constructed." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Drew Halden isn't a stranger," I said, placing the divorce papers on the table between us. "He's my co-worker, and he's been bragging about sleeping with you for 2 weeks." The silence that followed was profound. I could actually see the moment her carefully constructed story collapsed, the way her eyes widened and her mouth fell open. All that preparation, all those rehearsed tears, and she'd never considered the possibility that her stranger might have a big mouth. "Grant, I can explain." "No need," I interrupted, sliding the papers toward her. "Drew was very thorough in his descriptions. The hotel room on 5th Street, the way you told him about our marriage problems. How you said I didn't understand your career ambitions. He particularly enjoyed the part where you complained about my emotional distance during your mother's illness." That last detail hit her like a physical blow. I watched her remember those conversations, realize how intimate they'd become, how much of our private life she'd shared with him. "You worked 80-hour weeks to pay for Mom's treatments," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I did," I confirmed, "while you were telling your lover how neglectful I was. Drew found that especially amusing." Nora stared at the papers, her hands trembling. "How long have you known?" 2 weeks, since Drew decided to share his conquest with the entire project team. Apparently, sleeping with the boss's wife was quite the achievement for him." "I'm not the boss's wife," she said automatically, then caught herself. Even now, even caught in her lies, she was worried about her professional reputation. "No, but you are the wife of the man whose promotion he wanted," I explained. "Funny how that works out, isn't it? Drew targets my wife, destabilizes my marriage, and suddenly he's in line for the senior management position I was being considered for." I could see her mind working, trying to process the implications. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about career sabotage, about being used as a weapon against her own husband. "He used me," she said, the realization dawning slowly. "You let him," I corrected. "There's a difference." The papers sat between us like a barrier, legal documents that would dissolve 8 years of marriage. I'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, making sure everything was airtight. Nora's confession tonight was just the final piece of theater in a drama that was already over. "Grant, please," she said, reaching for the papers. "We can work through this. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." "Read the papers, Nora. Then we'll talk about what can and can't be fixed." She picked up the documents with shaking hands, and I watched her face change as she read. The divorce petition was straightforward enough, but the attached financial disclosure was where things got interesting. My lawyer had been very thorough in documenting the $43,000 in credit card debt she'd transferred to my business account without my knowledge. "You found the transfers," she said, her voice flat. "I found a lot of things: the debt transfers, the hotel receipts, the text messages with Jade about alibis, your journal entries about exit strategies." I paused, letting that sink in. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice $43,000 disappearing from my business account?" Nora set the papers down carefully, her confession abandoned entirely now. The scared, remorseful wife was gone, replaced by someone calculating and defensive. "I was going to tell you about the debt," she said. "When? Before or after you cleaned out our joint savings account?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the person I'd married. Maybe she never had been. Maybe I'd just been too busy working, too focused on building a life for us, to notice who she really was. "The journal entries were just thoughts," she said finally. I was confused, trying to work through my feelings. Your feelings about which assets you could claim in a divorce? Your thoughts about whether my business was community property? I shook my head. Those weren't confused feelings, Nora. That was strategic planning. The storm outside was getting worse, wind rattling the windows and rain coming down in sheets. It felt appropriate, like the weather was matching the destruction of my marriage. But unlike the storm, this disaster had been years in the making. "How long?" I asked. Not just Drew. "How long have you been planning to leave?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were dry, the tears finally stopped. "Since Mom got sick," she admitted, "watching you work those crazy hours, seeing how the stress aged you. I realized I didn't want that life. I didn't want to be married to someone who put work before everything else. I was paying for her treatments. I know that now," she said. "But at the time, all I saw was you leaving early every morning and coming home exhausted every night. I felt like I was married to a ghost." It was the first honest thing she'd said all evening, and it hurt more than all her lies combined, because I understood it. Those months had been brutal, watching her mother decline while scrambling to keep my business afloat and pay for experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. I'd barely slept, barely eaten, barely existed outside of work and worry. "So you decided to find someone else?" I said. "Not right away. First, I just wanted to feel attractive again, wanted to remember what it was like to talk to someone who wasn't stressed about money or medical bills. Jade suggested we start going out more. Just innocent fun." "And Jade introduced you to Drew?" "Not directly, but she knew where to find the kind of men who were interested in married women looking for excitement." Nora's voice was getting stronger, more defiant. "I'm not proud of it, Grant, but I'm not going to pretend I'm entirely to blame either." There it was, the rationalization I'd been waiting for. Somehow, my working to save her mother's life had justified her infidelity. My emotional exhaustion had excused her betrayal. In her mind, I'd driven her to this. "Sign the papers, Nora," I said, standing up from the table. "We're done here." "Just like that? 8 years of marriage, and you're ready to throw it all away?" "I'm not the one who threw it away," I reminded her. "I'm just the one cleaning up the mess." She picked up the pen I'd left beside the papers, then set it down again. "What about counseling? What about fighting for us?" "What us?" I asked. "The U.S. where you lie to my face every day? The U.S. where you steal from my business account? The U.S. where you plan your exit strategy while I'm working to pay your bills? That's not fair." "Fair?" The word came out harsher than I'd intended. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about Drew using information from my client files to poach my accounts. Let's talk about how he knew exactly which projects I was working on, exactly which clients were dissatisfied. Information he could only have gotten from you." Her face went white again. "I never gave him client information." "Your laptop, Nora, the one you use for work, the one you bring home every night. Drew had access to it every time you stayed at his hotel room. My entire client portfolio, downloaded and forwarded to Morrison's biggest competitor." I watched her remember, saw the moment she realized what she'd done. Her laptop had been with her every time, sitting in her bag while she was in bed with Drew. All he'd needed was a few minutes while she was in the shower. "Oh, God," she whispered. 43,000 in debt, a 6-month affair, and corporate espionage," I summarized. "But sure, let's talk about counseling." The pen remained untouched beside the papers. Outside, the storm was reaching its peak, thunder rolling across the sky like artillery fire. I found myself thinking about the weather forecast, wondering if the power would hold through the night. Anything to avoid looking at the woman who'd systematically destroyed our life together. "I loved you," she said quietly. Past tense noted. "I still love you. That's what makes this so hard." "No, Nora. What makes this hard is that you're finally facing consequences for your choices. Love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie, love doesn't plan exit strategies while pretending everything is fine." She picked up the pen again, held it for a moment, then set it down. "I need time to think." "You've had 6 months to think. Time's up." "Grant, please, can't we—" "Sign the papers," I repeated. "Or don't. But either way, I'm done pretending we have a marriage to save." The clock on the kitchen wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. 2:30 in the morning, and we were sitting in our kitchen dissolving our marriage over cold coffee and legal documents. Not exactly how I'd imagined this conversation going when I first learned about Drew's bragging. Finally, Nora picked up the pen and signed her name at the bottom of each page. Her signature was shaky, nothing like the confident script I remembered from our wedding certificate. When she finished, she pushed the papers back across the table. "There," she said. "Happy now?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm free. And that's enough." The next morning arrived gray and subdued, the storm having passed but leaving everything damp and disheveled in its wake. I stood at my kitchen window, watching water drip from the oak tree in our backyard, while my coffee grew cold in my hands. Nora had left sometime before dawn, taking a single suitcase and leaving her keys on the counter. The house felt different without her presence, not empty exactly, but cleaner somehow. Like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Silas. "Heard about last night. We need to talk." I stared at the message, feeling a familiar knot form in my stomach. Silas Oren had kept my last name when our parents divorced, but he'd always been closer to our mother's family. He'd also been Drew's business partner in a small investment firm for the past 3 years, a detail that had seemed insignificant until recently. Rather than respond to the text, I decided to drive to his office. Some conversations were better had in person, especially when they involved family betrayal and business partnerships. The offices of Oren and Associates sat in a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting designed to appeal to young entrepreneurs with more money than sense. I found Silas in his corner office, staring out the window at the river. He looked older than his 41 years, stress lines etched deep around his eyes. "Grant," he said, without turning around. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Were you?" I settled into the chair across from his desk, noting the way he avoided eye contact. "How long have you known?" "About Nora and Drew." He finally turned to face me, and I could see the guilt written across his features. 3 months, maybe 4. 3 months. While I'd been working 16-hour days to secure the Morrison contract, while I'd been taking Nora to dinner and trying to reconnect after the stress of her mother's illness, my brother had been watching my marriage disintegrate from the sidelines. "And you said nothing." What was I supposed to say? Silas moved to his desk, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "Hey, brother, your wife is sleeping with my business partner? How exactly does that conversation go?" "It goes with you picking up the phone and calling me," I said. "It goes with you choosing family over profit margins." "That's not fair, Grant. You don't understand the position I was in." "Enlighten me." Silas sank into his chair, looking every bit as defeated as Nora had the night before. "Drew brought in 60% of our client base this year. The investment firm, the real estate deals, the corporate consulting contracts. If I crossed him, if I interfered with his personal life, he could have destroyed the business. So you chose money over family." "I chose survival over sentiment," he corrected. Easy for you to judge when your electrical contracting business doesn't depend on one person's connections. My business depends on reputation, I countered. Something that's been systematically undermined by your partner using stolen information to poach my clients. The color drained from Silas's face. What are you talking about? Drew had access to Nora's laptop every time they met. My client files, project timelines, bid information. Everything he needed to undercut my contracts and steal my accounts. I leaned forward, watching my brother's expression change from confusion to horror. Tell me you didn't know about that part. Jesus, Grant, I swear I had no idea. But you suspected something when Morrison Industries suddenly switched contractors for the Riverside Development Project, didn't you? When 3 of my biggest clients decided to go with alternative firms in the same month? Silas was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Drew said he'd gotten lucky with some referrals, said his networking was paying off. His networking with my wife. I didn't put it together, Silas insisted. I knew about the affair, but I thought it was just personal. I never imagined he was using it to steal business intelligence. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, despite the months of silence and the obvious conflict of interest, I wanted to believe my brother wasn't complicit in the business side of Drew's betrayal. But trust, once broken, doesn't repair easily. What happens now? I asked. What do you mean? With your partnership, with Drew. You can't seriously expect to continue working with him after this. Silas looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair like a man trying to find a position that didn't hurt. It's complicated, Grant. We have contracts, obligations. I can't just walk away from the business. You can't walk away or you won't. Both, he admitted. Drew holds the majority stake in the partnership. If I try to force him out over personal issues, he can buy out my share at market value. I'd lose everything I've built. So you're going to keep working with the man who destroyed my marriage and stole my clients. I'm going to keep working with the man who pays my mortgage and my kids' college tuition, Silas said, his voice getting defensive. I'm sorry about what happened to you and Nora, truly sorry, but I can't sacrifice my family's security for revenge. The word hung between us like a challenge. Revenge. As if wanting justice for betrayal was somehow petty or unreasonable. As if expecting family loyalty was asking too much. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything, I said carefully. I'm asking you to do the right thing. The right thing for who? For you? Or for my wife and kids who depend on my income? It was a fair question, and I hated him for asking it. Because the truth was, I did want him to choose me over his financial security. I wanted him to stand up to Drew, consequences be damned. I wanted family to mean more than business partnerships and profit margins. What would you do? He asked. If the situations were reversed, what would you do? I thought about it, really considered the question. Would I risk my business, my employees' livelihoods, my own financial stability to expose a partner's personal misconduct? Would I choose moral high ground over practical reality? I'd find another way, I said finally. I'd figure out how to do the right thing without destroying everything else. Easy to say when it's hypothetical. Maybe, but that's the difference between us, Silas. You're looking for excuses to avoid a hard choice. I'm looking for solutions. My phone rang before he could respond. The caller ID showed my office number, which was strange since I'd given my assistant the day off. I answered cautiously. Grant Solon. Mr. Solon, this is Detective Patricia Hayes with the Metro Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about an incident last night involving your vehicle. My stomach dropped. What kind of incident? Someone reported seeing your truck in the parking lot of the Riverside Hotel around midnight. There was an act of vandalism against another vehicle in the same lot, a silver Tesla belonging to Drew Halden. I closed my eyes, remembering the satisfaction I'd felt keying Drew's car 2 weeks ago. Apparently, someone had seen more than I'd realized. I'll need to call you back, Detective, I said. I'm with my attorney. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I hung up and looked at Silas, who was staring at me with a mixture of concern and fear. "What was that about?" he asked. "Your partner's car got vandalized last night. The police seemed to think I was involved." "Were you?" 2 weeks ago, yes. Last night, no. But I have a feeling that distinction isn't going to matter much." Silas ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood whenever he was stressed. "This is getting out of hand, Grant. Maybe you should consider backing off, letting things cool down." "Backing off from what? I filed for divorce. That's not exactly an escalation." "But vandalizing Drew's car, confronting him at work, making accusations about stolen client information? It looks like harassment. It looks like a man defending himself against someone who's been systematically destroying his life." "It looks like revenge," Silas said. "And revenge makes people do stupid things." Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time it was my lawyer, which meant Detective Hayes had probably called him too. The legal complications were beginning, and I had a feeling things were about to get much more complex. "I need to go," I told Silas, standing up from the chair. "Think about what I said, about finding another way." "Grant, wait." He stood too, moving around the desk toward me. "I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But be careful. Drew has resources, connections. If you push too hard, he's going to push back." "Let him," I said. "I've got nothing left to lose." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I had my business, my reputation, my freedom. All things that could be taken away if I wasn't careful about how I handled the next phase of this situation. The drive to my lawyer's office gave me time to think about strategy. Drew was escalating, using the police to intimidate me. That suggested he was worried, maybe even scared. People who felt secure in their position didn't usually involve law enforcement in personal disputes. My attorney, Rebecca Martinez, was waiting in her conference room with a cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in notes. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, someone I'd hired for business contracts, who was now helping me navigate the wreckage of my personal life. "Tell me about the car," she said without preamble. 2 weeks ago, I keyed Drew's Tesla in a moment of poor judgment. Last night I was home with Nora from 11:30 until she left around 4 in the morning. Someone else vandalized his car, but he's trying to pin it on me. "Can Nora verify your alibi?" I thought about that. Probably not willingly. We signed divorce papers last night. Rebecca made a note on her pad. "What kind of vandalism are we talking about?" Detective Hayes didn't specify. Just said someone reported seeing my truck in the hotel parking lot. "But you weren't there." "Definitely not. I was dealing with my wife's confession and the divorce papers." "Her confession to what?" I gave Rebecca the abbreviated version of the previous night's events, watching her take notes and occasionally nod. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me seriously. "Grant, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you planning any kind of retaliation against Drew Halden?" "I'm planning to protect my business and my reputation," I said. "If that constitutes retaliation, then yes. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Are you planning to harass him, intimidate him, or engage in any other conduct that could be construed as threatening?" "No," I said, and meant it. "I'm not interested in going to jail over someone like Drew." "Good, because he's clearly trying to build a case for harassment or stalking. The police call, the vandalism report, probably a restraining order next. Classic strategy for someone who wants to control the narrative. So what do I do?" "You stay away from him completely. No contact, no confrontations, no driving by his office or his home. You document everything related to the stolen client information and let me handle the legal response, and you find witnesses who can verify your whereabouts last night. The only witness is Nora, and she's not exactly motivated to help me right now. Then we find another way to establish your alibi: security cameras, credit card transactions, phone records, something that puts you somewhere else when the vandalism occurred." I thought about the previous evening, trying to remember any electronic trail that might support my story. I'd ordered takeout around 9, paid with a credit card. The delivery driver had seen me at home. My phone had been connected to my home Wi-Fi network all evening. Small details, but potentially enough to establish reasonable doubt. "There's something else," I said. "My brother knew about the affair for months and didn't tell me. He's Drew's business partner." Rebecca looked up from her notes. "That's a conflict of interest, but not necessarily a legal problem, unless he was involved in the business espionage. He says he wasn't, but I'm not sure I believe him." "Do you have evidence that he was involved?" "Just suspicion and opportunity. Drew needed someone with access to financial information about my business to know which contracts to target. Silas has that access through our family connections." "Suspicion isn't evidence," Rebecca reminded me, "but it's worth investigating. I'll have my investigator look into both Drew and your brother, see what we can find." We spent another hour going over the details of my situation, developing a strategy that would protect me legally while allowing me to fight back against Drew's attempts to destroy my business. By the time I left Rebecca's office, I felt more in control, more focused on solutions rather than problems. But as I drove home through the gray afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Drew had made the first move by involving the police. Now it was my turn to respond, and I intended to make sure my response was both legal and devastating. The house felt different when I walked in, emptier, but also cleaner somehow. Nora's absence was noticeable in small ways. No coffee cup in the sink, no shoes by the front door, no sound of the television from the living room. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely in my own home. I made a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the spot where Nora had signed the divorce papers just 12 hours earlier. The whole scene felt surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else. But the papers were gone, filed with the court that morning, making it all legally real. My phone buzzed with another text from Silas. "Drew knows about the police call. He's asking questions about what you might do next." I stared at the message, feeling a familiar anger building in my chest. My brother was still feeding information to Drew, still choosing his business partner over his family. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified something important. I was truly alone in this fight, which meant I was free to fight it my way. 3 days passed before Drew made his next move, and when it came, it was more sophisticated than I'd expected. I was in my office reviewing contracts when my assistant, Maria, knocked on the door with a worried expression. "Mr. Solon, there are 2 men here from the State Licensing Board. They want to inspect our records." I looked up from the Morrison Industries file I'd been studying, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. "What kind of inspection?" "They said someone filed a complaint about our electrical work on the Riverside Development Project. Something about code violations and safety issues." The Riverside Project. The same contract Drew had helped Morrison's competitor steal from me 6 months ago. The timing wasn't coincidental. "Send them in," I told Maria, "and call Rebecca Martinez. Tell her we need her here immediately." The 2 inspectors were exactly what you'd expect from state bureaucrats. Middle-aged men in cheap suits carrying clipboards and wearing expressions of practiced boredom. They introduced themselves as Johnson and Chen from the Department of Professional Regulation. "Mr. Solon," Johnson began, consulting his clipboard, "we've received a formal complaint regarding electrical work performed by your company on the Morrison Industries Riverside Development Project. The complaint alleges multiple code violations and potential safety hazards." "What specific violations?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Improper grounding, inadequate circuit protection, substandard wire gauge for the load requirements," Chen read from his notes. "The complainant provided detailed documentation and photographs." Detailed documentation. That meant someone with electrical knowledge had filed the complaint. Someone who understood the technical aspects well enough to make specific accusations. Drew didn't have that expertise, but he had connections who did. I'd like to see the complaint and the supporting documentation, I said. That's not typically provided during the initial inspection, Johnson replied. We'll need to examine your records first, verify the work was performed according to the approved plans. Of course. Maria will get you everything you need. I spent the next 2 hours watching the inspectors go through my files, photographing documents and making notes. They were thorough and professional, which made the situation more frustrating. This wasn't harassment or intimidation. This was a legitimate regulatory process being weaponized against me. Rebecca arrived just as the inspectors were finishing up. She spoke quietly with them for a few minutes, then joined me in my office after they left. They found discrepancies, she said without preamble. What kind of discrepancies? The work orders in your files don't match the specifications in the approved building plans. According to the inspectors, someone modified the electrical design after approval, but didn't update the documentation. I felt the room spin slightly. That's impossible. I personally reviewed every specification before we started work. When was the last time you checked the approved plans on file with the city? 6 months ago when we finished the project. I paused, understanding beginning to dawn. Unless someone modified the filed plans after the work was completed. That's exactly what happened, Rebecca confirmed. Someone with access to the city planning database altered the approved specifications to make your completed work appear non-compliant. Drew, or someone working with him. This level of manipulation requires inside knowledge of both your work and the regulatory system, plus computer access to city databases. I thought about Drew's connections, his network of contacts in city government and the construction industry. He'd been cultivating those relationships for years, building the kind of influence that could make problems appear or disappear depending on his needs. What happens now? I asked. The state will conduct a full investigation. If they find violations, you could face fines, license suspension, even criminal charges if they determine the safety issues were intentional. And if I can prove the plans were altered after the fact? Then we file charges against whoever did the altering. But proving it won't be easy. We'll need computer forensics, expert testimony, probably a lengthy legal battle. My phone rang before I could respond. The caller ID showed Morrison Industries, which was unexpected. I'd assumed that bridge was permanently burned. Grant Solon. Mr. Solon, this is Patricia Morrison. I think we need to talk. Patricia Morrison was the CEO of Morrison Industries, a woman in her 60s who'd built her company from nothing and had a reputation for both fairness and ruthlessness. I'd worked with her on several projects before Drew's interference cost me the Riverside contract. Mrs. Morrison, what can I do for you? You can meet me for coffee in an hour. There are some things about the Riverside project you need to know. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Angelo's coffee shop on 5th Street. 1 hour. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what new complication was about to enter my life. Who was that? Rebecca asked. Patricia Morrison. She wants to meet about the Riverside project. The same project that's now under investigation? The same one. I looked at Rebecca, seeing my own concern reflected in her expression. This can't be coincidental. No, it probably can't. Do you want me to come with you? Not yet. Let me hear what she has to say first. Angelo's coffee shop was a small, family-owned place that had been serving the downtown business district for 30 years. Patricia Morrison was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a manila folder. She looked exactly as I remembered. Silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, sharp gray eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Grant, she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Morrison, I have to admit I'm surprised to hear from you. I imagine you are, especially given the circumstances. She opened the manila folder and slid a photograph across the table. Do you recognize this? The photograph showed a section of electrical panel work, clearly from the Riverside project. The wiring was neat and professional, exactly the kind of work my company was known for. But there were red circles drawn around several connection points, highlighting what appeared to be code violations. "This is from the Riverside project," I said, "but I don't understand what I'm looking at." "This photograph was taken last week by an electrical inspector hired by our insurance company. They were doing a routine safety audit of the building before we finalized the occupancy permits. And they found exactly what you see in that picture. Code violations, safety hazards, work that doesn't meet the approved specifications." She paused, studying my face. "Work that was supposedly done by your company." I looked at the photograph again, focusing on the details. The wiring configuration was wrong, the circuit protection inadequate, the grounding connections substandard. It was exactly the kind of work that would generate a complaint to the state licensing board. "Mrs. Morrison, I can assure you that my company didn't do this work. What you're showing me is not the standard we maintain." "I know," she said simply. "You know? Grant, I've been in this business for 40 years. I know good work when I see it, and I know your reputation. The work in this photograph is not consistent with anything you've ever done for me." I felt a surge of relief mixed with confusion. "Then why are you showing it to me?" "Because someone wants me to believe you did this work. Someone who had access to the building after your company finished the original installation." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a different angle of the same electrical panel. "Look at the timestamp on this picture." The timestamp showed a date 3 weeks after my company had completed the Riverside project and been paid in full. 3 weeks after we'd passed the final inspection and turned the building over to Morrison Industries. "Someone came back," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Someone came back and deliberately sabotaged the electrical work to make it appear substandard. Then they filed a complaint with the state licensing board and provided photographs as evidence. Do you know who? I have suspicions. The same person who convinced me to cancel your contract and hire a different electrical contractor for the project expansion." She pulled out a third document. This one, a business proposal. "Drew Halden brought me this proposal 6 months ago, claiming he'd discovered serious problems with your work quality." I stared at the proposal, seeing Drew's signature at the bottom. The document outlined a plan to replace my company with a different contractor, citing safety concerns and cost overruns that had never actually occurred. "He showed me photographs then, too," Patricia continued. "Pictures of allegedly substandard work, documentation of supposed code violations. I trusted his expertise and made the decision to terminate your contract. But now you think he fabricated the evidence. I think Drew Halden has been systematically manipulating multiple projects to benefit himself and his associates. The Riverside project was just the beginning." She opened the manila folder wider, revealing a stack of documents and photographs. "My security team has been investigating irregularities in several recent projects. We've found evidence of bid manipulation, falsified inspection reports, and deliberate sabotage of completed work." "All connected to Drew?" "All connected to Drew, either directly or through his network of contacts. He's been running a sophisticated operation to control construction contracts in this city." I thought about the implications. This wasn't just about my marriage or my stolen clients. This was about corruption on a scale that could affect dozens of businesses and potentially endanger public safety. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're not the only victim, and because I need your help to stop him." Patricia leaned forward, her expression intense. "Drew has been using personal relationships to gather intelligence about his targets. Your wife wasn't the first married woman he's seduced for business purposes." The words hit me like a physical blow. Nora hadn't been special, hadn't been chosen for her beauty or charm. She'd been selected as a target, a source of information and leverage against me. "How many others?" I asked. "At least 3 that we've identified. all wives of contractors or business owners who later lost major contracts under suspicious circumstances. Patricia pulled out another folder. Drew has a pattern, Grant. He identifies successful businesses he wants to undermine, then finds personal vulnerabilities he can exploit. And my brother? Silas has been providing financial information about your business operations, bank records, contract details, client lists, everything Drew needed to know exactly when and how to strike. The betrayal was complete now, not just Nora and Drew, but Silas too. My own brother had been feeding information to my enemy, helping him destroy everything I'd built. I want to help, I said. What do you need from me? Evidence, documentation, testimony about how Drew gained access to your business information and client files? Patricia closed the folders and looked at me seriously. But I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Drew has resources and connections. When he realizes we're coming after him, he's going to fight back hard. He's already fighting back. The police complaint, the state inspection, probably more to come. Then we need to move fast. My security team is meeting tomorrow morning to plan our approach. Can you be there? Absolutely. Patricia stood up, gathering her folders. Grant, there's one more thing you should know. The vandalism to Drew's car last night, it wasn't random. Someone is trying to escalate this conflict, make it look like a personal vendetta rather than a business dispute. Someone who wants to discredit me before I can expose the corruption. Exactly. Be careful, Grant. You're not just fighting for your business anymore. You're fighting for your freedom. As I watched Patricia Morrison walk out of the coffee shop, I felt a mixture of vindication and dread. I'd been right about Drew's manipulation, right about the scope of his corruption. But I was also more vulnerable than I'd realized, caught in a web of deceit that extended far beyond my failed marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or things get worse for everyone. I stared at the message, feeling a chill run down my spine. Drew was escalating again, moving from legal harassment to direct threats, which meant I was getting close to something he desperately wanted to keep hidden. I forwarded the text to Rebecca and Patricia Morrison, then deleted it from my phone. Tomorrow's meeting couldn't come soon enough. It was time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. Patricia Morrison's security team met in a conference room on the 20th floor of the Morrison Industries building, with a view of the river that had once seemed peaceful, but now reminded me of all the projects Drew had stolen from me. The team consisted of 3 people: Patricia herself, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb who now ran corporate investigations, and a cybersecurity expert named Jennifer Chen who looked young enough to be my daughter, but spoke with the authority of someone who'd seen every type of digital deception. Before we begin, Patricia said, I want everyone to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just about one corrupt businessman or a few stolen contracts. We've uncovered evidence of a systematic operation to manipulate the construction industry in this city. Marcus opened a laptop and projected a diagram onto the wall screen. It looked like a family tree, with Drew's name at the center and lines connecting him to dozens of other names and businesses. Drew Halden is the hub, Marcus explained, but he's not working alone. He's got contacts in city planning, the licensing board, the inspector's office, and at least 6 major construction companies. They're all feeding him information and taking direction from him. How long has this been going on? I asked. At least 5 years, probably longer. The pattern is consistent. Identify successful independent contractors, gather intelligence on their operations, then systematically undermine their business until they're forced to sell or go bankrupt. Jennifer pulled up another screen showing financial records. The money trail is complex, but we've identified at least 12 businesses that have been acquired by Drew's network after being driven to bankruptcy, combined value of approximately $40 million. $40 million. I thought about my own business, worth maybe $2 million on a good day, and realized I was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. What about the personal relationships? I asked. The affairs, the manipulation of family members? That's Drew's specialty, Patricia said. He identifies the personal vulnerabilities of his targets and exploits them ruthlessly. Your wife, your brother, your client relationships. Everything becomes a weapon in his hands. Marcus pulled up a new document. We've identified 7 other cases where Drew seduced wives or family members of business owners to gain inside information. In 3 cases, the marriages ended in divorce. In 2 cases, the businesses went bankrupt. All 7 business owners lost major contracts within 6 months of Drew's involvement. And nobody connected the pattern? Drew is careful to spread his activities across different industries and geographic areas. A restaurant owner in the North End, a plumbing contractor downtown, an architectural firm in the suburbs. No obvious connection until you map out the entire network. I studied the diagram on the screen, seeing my own name connected to Drew through multiple lines. Nora, Silas, the Morrison contract, the licensing board complaint. I was more deeply embedded in his web than I'd realized. What's our legal standing? I asked. Can we prove criminal activity? That's complicated, Jennifer said. Most of what Drew does operates in gray areas. Seducing married women isn't illegal. Having contacts in city government isn't illegal. Even manipulating business relationships isn't necessarily criminal unless we can prove fraud or conspiracy. But altering city planning documents is illegal, Marcus added. And we can prove that happened in your case. Jennifer's forensic analysis shows the approved plans for the Riverside project were modified in the city database 3 weeks after your work was completed. Can you trace who made the modifications? We're working on it. The changes were made using legitimate administrative credentials, which suggests someone with authorized access. But we can track the specific computer and timestamp. Patricia leaned forward. That's where you come in, Grant. We need someone on the inside, someone Drew trusts enough to reveal information to. Drew doesn't trust me. He's actively trying to destroy me. Not Drew directly, but his network includes people who might be willing to talk if approached correctly. She pulled out a list of names. Silas, for example. Your brother is in a vulnerable position right now. His business partnership with Drew is profitable, but it's also legally risky if we can prove conspiracy. I looked at Silas's name on the list, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. My brother had chosen money over family, but he might also be the key to bringing down Drew's entire operation. What do you want me to do? Approach Silas. Tell him we know about the network, about the document alterations, about the systematic fraud. Give him a chance to cooperate before we involve law enforcement. And if he refuses? Then we move forward without him. But it would be easier with his testimony and his access to Drew's business records. Marcus closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. Grant, I need to be clear about the risks. If Drew realizes we're building a case against him, he's going to escalate his attacks on you. More police complaints, more regulatory investigations, possibly worse. What do you mean by worse? Physical intimidation, threats against your business or your employees. Drew has connections to some unsavory people, contractors who aren't particular about how they solve problems. I thought about the anonymous text message I'd received the day before. He's already making threats. Then we need to move fast. Every day we delay gives him more time to cover his tracks and prepare his defenses. Jennifer pulled out a thick folder. We've prepared a complete dossier on Drew's network. Financial records, communication logs, documented instances of bid manipulation, and document falsification. It's enough to get law enforcement interested, but we need more direct evidence to guarantee convictions. How long do we have? Maybe a week before Drew realizes the scope of our investigation. After that, he'll either disappear or go on the offensive in ways that could be dangerous for everyone involved. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of strategy and timeline. By the end, I had a clear understanding of my role. Approach Silas, gather whatever evidence he was willing to provide, and try to flip him before Drew realized what was happening. As I left the Morrison Industries building, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Hope that we might actually be able to stop Drew and his network. Dread about what might happen to me and my business in the process. My phone rang as I reached my truck. The caller ID showed Nora's number, which surprised me. We hadn't spoken since she'd signed the divorce papers 4 days earlier. "Hello, Nora?" "Grant, we need to talk. Something's happened." Her voice sounded strained, frightened in a way I hadn't heard since her mother's diagnosis. Despite everything she'd done, my first instinct was still to protect her. "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere?" "Where are you staying?" "With Jade. But not here. Somewhere public." Jade Marin. The woman who'd orchestrated my wife's affair for $200 per alibi. The last person I wanted to see or deal with. "The coffee shop on 5th Street, I said. 1 hour. "Thank you, Grant, and be careful. I think someone's been following me." She hung up before I could ask what she meant, leaving me with more questions and a growing sense that Drew's escalation was about to reach a new level. The drive to the coffee shop gave me time to think about what Nora might want to tell me. Had she learned something about Drew's network? Was she having second thoughts about the divorce? Or was this another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative? I arrived at Angelo's coffee shop to find Nora sitting in the same booth where I'd met Patricia Morrison the day before. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, clothes that suggested she'd been wearing them for more than 1 day. "You look awful," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks. You always knew how to make a girl feel special." But there was no humor in her voice, just exhaustion and fear. "What's going on, Nora?" "Drew's been calling me, constantly, day and night. He's angry about the divorce, says I wasn't supposed to tell you about the affair." "Wasn't supposed to? According to who?" "According to the plan." She looked up at me with hollow eyes. "Grant, I think I was set up. The whole thing, the affair, the confession, everything. I think it was all orchestrated." "By Drew?" "By Drew and Jade. Maybe others. I found text messages on Jade's phone, conversations about timing and strategy and how to handle the aftermath." Her hands were shaking as she reached for her coffee cup. "I wasn't having an affair, Grant. I was being manipulated into having an affair." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But all I saw was genuine fear and confusion, the expression of someone who'd realized they'd been played. "Tell me about the text messages." "Jade's been coordinating with someone, planning out every detail. When to suggest girls' nights, which bars to go to, how to introduce me to Drew, even what I should say when I confess to you." "Do you have copies of the messages?" I took pictures with my phone before Jade caught me looking. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of screenshots. "Look at the dates. This goes back almost a year." I scrolled through the messages, seeing a detailed plan to seduce and manipulate my wife. The level of coordination was staggering. Specific dates, locations, even scripted conversations designed to make Nora feel special and desired while gathering information about my business. "Who is Jade texting with?" I asked. "I don't know. The contact is just listed as D in her phone." Drew. It had to be Drew, coordinating with Jade to orchestrate the entire affair. My wife hadn't betrayed me impulsively. She'd been systematically seduced as part of a business strategy. "Nora, I need you to listen to me carefully. You're in danger. Drew isn't just some guy who had an affair with you. He's part of a criminal network that's been manipulating businesses and people for years." Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" I gave her an abbreviated version of what I'd learned from Patricia Morrison's investigation, watching her expression change from confusion to horror as she realized the scope of what she'd been caught up in. "Oh God," she whispered. "What have I done?" "You were a victim, Nora. Manipulated and used just like I was. But the debt, the money I transferred from your business account, that wasn't manipulation." "No," I admitted. That was a choice you made, but everything else, the affair, the timing, the way it all played out, that was orchestrated. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the implications. My marriage had been destroyed not by passion or even ordinary infidelity, but by a calculated business strategy designed to gather intelligence and create leverage. "What happens now?" Nora asked. "Now you help me stop them. You testify about what happened, provide evidence of the manipulation, help us build a case against Drew and his network." "And if I don't?" "Then you're still in danger. Drew can't afford to have witnesses who understand how his operation works. The threatening phone calls are just the beginning." Nora's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at it, and her face went white. "What is it?" I asked. She showed me the screen. The message was from Drew. "Stop talking to people or Jade pays the price." "He knows we're meeting," she said, looking around the coffee shop nervously. "Or he's guessing. Either way, you're not safe staying with Jade. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have money for a hotel, and my friends—" She trailed off, realizing that most of her friends were probably part of Drew's network, or had been influenced by it. "You can stay in the guest room at my house," I said, surprising myself with the offer. "Temporarily, until we figure out how to handle this safely." "Grant, I don't think that's a good idea. We're getting divorced, and after everything I've done—" "This isn't about our marriage," I interrupted. "This is about keeping you alive long enough to testify against the people who manipulated both of us." She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to understand why I would help her after everything that had happened. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure myself. Maybe it was because I finally understood that she'd been a victim too. Maybe it was because I needed her testimony to bring down Drew's network. Or maybe it was just because, despite everything, I couldn't stand by and watch someone get hurt when I had the power to prevent it. "Okay," she said finally, "but just until this is over." "Just until this is over," I agreed. As we left the coffee shop together, I caught sight of a silver sedan parked across the street with two men inside watching us. When they saw me looking, the driver started the engine and pulled away. Drew's network was already responding to our meeting. The game was escalating again, and I had a feeling the next phase was going to be more dangerous than anything we'd faced so far. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my office. I was reviewing the evidence Patricia Morrison's team had compiled when Maria knocked on my door with a worried expression I was becoming too familiar with. "Mr. Solon, your brother is here. He says it's urgent." Silas looked terrible when he walked into my office. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie crooked, and his eyes had the haunted look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He collapsed into the chair across from my desk without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk, Grant," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm listening." "Drew knows about your meeting with Patricia Morrison. He knows about the investigation, the evidence you're gathering, everything." I felt my stomach drop. "How does he know?" "Because he has people everywhere. City Hall, the police department, the licensing board. He knew about Morrison's security team before they even started investigating." "And you've been feeding him information about me?" Silas looked up with genuine surprise. "What?" "No, Grant. I haven't told Drew anything about you." "Then how did he know to file the licensing board complaint right after I discovered the affair? How did he know exactly which contracts to target, which clients to steal?" "He got that information from Nora's laptop, from the financial records she had access to through your home computer. I never gave him anything directly." I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of deception. He seemed genuinely confused by my accusations, which meant either he was a better liar than I'd given him credit for, or there were aspects of Drew's network I still didn't understand. "Why are you here, Silas?" "Because Drew is planning something big, something that's going to destroy you completely and probably get people hurt in the process." "What kind of something?" Silas pulled out his phone and showed me a text message conversation. Drew's been coordinating with some contractors who aren't particular about their methods. They're planning to sabotage one of your current job sites, make it look like your work caused a serious accident. I read through the messages, feeling a chill run down my spine. The plan was detailed and sophisticated. Create a gas leak in a building where my company had recently completed electrical work, then trigger an explosion that would appear to be caused by faulty wiring. When? I asked. Tonight, the Riverside office complex, the one where you just finished the lighting installation. The Riverside office complex housed 12 businesses and employed over 200 people. An explosion there wouldn't just destroy my reputation, it could harm or even end dozens of innocent lives. Why are you telling me this? Because I finally realized what kind of person I've been working with, Silas said, his voice breaking slightly. Drew isn't just corrupt, Grant. He's dangerous. He's willing to hurt innocent people to get what he wants. And you're just figuring this out now? I knew he was ruthless in business. I knew he manipulated people and bent rules. But I never thought he'd risk innocent lives for profit. I looked at my brother, seeing genuine remorse and fear in his expression. Maybe he really hadn't understood the full scope of Drew's operation. Maybe he'd been manipulated too, just in a different way. What do you want from me? I asked. Help me stop him. Help me do the right thing before people get hurt. And your business partnership? Your financial security? None of that matters if people die because I stayed silent. Silas leaned forward, his eyes pleading. I know I've been a coward, Grant. I know I chose money over family. But I'm trying to make it right now. I thought about Patricia Morrison's investigation, about the evidence we'd been gathering, about the timeline we'd established. Everything was moving too slowly to prevent tonight's sabotage attempt. What exactly is Drew planning? I asked. His contractors are going to enter the building after hours, create a small gas leak in the basement, then trigger an electrical short circuit that will cause an explosion. The investigation will show that your electrical work was the cause, and Drew will be conveniently positioned to get the contract for rebuilding, along with insurance payouts, legal settlements from the families of anyone who gets hurt, and complete control over the downtown construction market. The scope of Drew's ambition was staggering. He wasn't just stealing contracts. He was willing to commit mass destruction to achieve his goals. We need to call the police, I said. With what evidence? Text messages between Drew and people whose names I don't even know? They'll investigate, maybe patrol the building a few extra times, but they won't take it seriously enough to prevent what's going to happen. Then we call the fire department, the gas company, building security. Drew has contacts in all those places too. Any official report will get back to him, and he'll just postpone the operation until the heat dies down. I realized Silas was right. Drew's network was too extensive, too well connected to be stopped through normal channels. We needed a different approach. What are you suggesting? We stop them ourselves, tonight at the building. We catch them in the act and document everything. That's dangerous, Silas. If Drew's people are willing to cause an explosion, they're not going to hesitate to hurt us if we interfere. Then we bring backup. Patricia Morrison's security team, maybe some off-duty police officers who aren't connected to Drew's network. I thought about Marcus Webb, the former FBI agent working with Patricia Morrison. He'd have the expertise to handle a situation like this, and the connections to bring in trustworthy law enforcement. Let me make some calls, I said. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, planning sessions, and coordination with Patricia Morrison's team. Marcus Webb took charge of the operation, bringing in 3 former law enforcement officers and arranging for backup from a state police unit that operated independently of the local department. By evening, we had a plan. Marcus and his team would position themselves around the Riverside office complex, with cameras and recording equipment to document any sabotage attempt. Silas would monitor Drew's communications and provide real-time updates. I would be stationed in a surveillance van with Patricia Morrison, coordinating the response and ensuring we had legal oversight of everything that happened. Remember, Marcus said as we reviewed the plan one final time, we're not trying to be heroes. We document the crime, gather evidence, and let law enforcement handle the arrests. Nobody takes unnecessary risks. But as we took our positions around the building, I had a feeling the night wasn't going to go according to plan. Drew had been manipulating people and situations for years. He wasn't going to be caught easily. At 11:30 p.m., Silas's voice crackled through our radio communication. 2 vehicles approaching from the east, 4 men carrying equipment bags. Through the surveillance van's monitors, I could see the men approaching the building. They moved with professional efficiency, using lockpicks to gain entry through a service door and disappearing into the basement level. Teams 1 and 2 moved to backup positions, Marcus commanded. Team 3 maintain perimeter watch. For the next hour, we watched as Drew's contractors worked inside the building. Our thermal imaging showed them moving through the basement, apparently installing equipment and making modifications to the building's systems. Then everything went wrong at once. Additional vehicles approaching, came the voice of Team 3. 6 men, heavily armed. This isn't a sabotage operation anymore. Through the van's windows, I could see the new arrivals taking positions around the building. These weren't contractors or saboteurs, they were security personnel, probably hired muscle brought in to eliminate witnesses. Drew knows we're here, Patricia said, her voice tense. This is a trap. All teams, abort operation, Marcus commanded. Fall back to secondary positions. But it was too late. The armed men were already moving to surround our positions, cutting off escape routes and forcing a confrontation. Grant. Silas's voice came through the radio, tight with fear. Drew's here. He's in the building, and he knows I betrayed him. Where are you? 3rd floor, northeast corner. He's got 2 men with him, and they're heading for the stairs. I looked at Patricia Morrison, seeing my own fear reflected in her eyes. We'd walked into Drew's trap, and now people were going to get hurt. Marcus, I said into the radio, we need to get Silas out of there. Negative, too dangerous. We wait for state police backup. By then it'll be too late. I was out of the van before Patricia could stop me, running toward the building through the darkness. Behind me, I could hear Marcus cursing and calling for his teams to provide cover. The service door was still unlocked from when Drew's contractors had entered. I slipped inside, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the unfamiliar hallways. The building was eerily quiet, with only the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of voices from somewhere above. I found the stairwell and started climbing, trying to move quietly while listening for any indication of where Drew and his men might be. At the 2nd floor, I heard voices coming from above. Drew's smooth, confident tone and Silas's higher-pitched responses. You disappoint me, Silas, Drew was saying as I reached the 3rd floor landing. I thought we had an understanding about loyalty and business partnerships. We did, Silas replied, his voice shaking, but not about hurting innocent people. Innocent people? Drew laughed. There are no innocent people in business, Silas. There are winners and losers, predators and prey. I thought you understood that. I peered around the corner and saw them in an office at the end of the hallway. Drew stood with his back to me, flanked by 2 large men in dark clothing. Silas was sitting in a chair, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face bruised from what appeared to be recent violence. The question now, Drew continued, is what to do with you. You've caused me considerable inconvenience, and you've compromised an operation that took months to plan. The police know about tonight, Silas said. They're already surrounding the building. The police know what I want them to know, Drew replied. Local law enforcement is remarkably cooperative when properly motivated. I needed to create a distraction, something that would give Silas a chance to escape and alert Marcus's team to our location. The building's fire alarm system was controlled from a panel near the elevator, just 20 feet from where I was hiding. Moving as quietly as possible, I made my way to the fire alarm panel and pulled the handle. Immediately, sirens began wailing throughout the building and emergency lighting activated in the hallways. "What the hell?" I heard Drew shout over the noise. I used the confusion to move closer to the office where they were holding Silas. Through the doorway, I could see Drew gesturing angrily at his men, probably ordering them to investigate the alarm. One of the men started toward the hallway where I was hiding. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping the emergency lighting wouldn't reveal my position. As he passed my hiding spot, I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount and brought it down on the back of his head. He dropped to the floor with a grunt, his weapon clattering across the tile. I grabbed the gun and pointed it toward the office, though I'd never fired a weapon in my life and had no idea if I could actually use it. "Drew!" I shouted over the fire alarm. "Let my brother go!" The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted from the office, bullets shattering the hallway windows and sending glass cascading to the floor. I dove behind a reception desk, clutching the unfamiliar weapon and trying to figure out what to do next. "Grant Solon!" Drew's voice carried clearly over the alarm. "I should have known you'd be stupid enough to play hero." "It's over, Drew," I shouted back. "The police are coming, and we have evidence of your entire operation." "Evidence that will disappear along with the witnesses," Drew replied. "Did you really think you could outsmart me?" More gunfire, this time from multiple directions. Drew's remaining men were taking positions throughout the office suite, turning the third floor into a battlefield. I could hear sirens outside the building now, probably Marcus's backup finally arriving. "Silas," I called out, "are you okay?" "I'm here," came his voice from the office, "but Drew's got enough firepower to hold off an army." The fire alarm suddenly stopped, plunging the building into an eerie silence broken only by the distant sound of sirens. In the quiet, I could hear Drew talking on his phone, probably coordinating with his contacts in law enforcement to control the situation. "You know what the beautiful thing about chaos is?" Drew called out to me. "It creates opportunities. By the time this is over, you and your brother will be the ones who look like the criminals. Two desperate men who broke into a building and started a gunfight with security personnel. Nobody's going to believe that story. They'll believe whatever story I tell them. I've got witnesses, evidence, and enough influence to make sure the narrative goes my way." I realized Drew was probably right. His network extended deep into local law enforcement and government. Even with Patricia Morrison's evidence, he might be able to spin tonight's events to his advantage. But then I heard something that changed everything. Marcus Webb's voice coming through a megaphone from outside the building. "This is Marcus Webb, former FBI working with state law enforcement. The building is surrounded. Everyone inside needs to exit immediately with their hands visible. State law enforcement. Not local police under Drew's influence, but state officers who operated independently of his network." Patricia Morrison had called in bigger guns than I'd realized. "Drew!" I shouted. "It's over! State police are here!" The gunfire that followed was intense, but brief. Drew's men were professionals, but they were also smart enough to recognize when they were outgunned and outnumbered. Within minutes, I heard weapons being thrown down and voices calling out surrender. I emerged from behind the reception desk to find Drew standing in the office doorway, his hands raised but his expression still confident and defiant. "This isn't over, Grant," he said, as state police officers entered the building. "You have no idea how deep this goes, or how many people you've just made enemies of." "Maybe not," I replied. "But at least now everyone will know what kind of person you really are." As the police led Drew and his men away, I helped cut the zip ties from Silas's wrists. My brother looked shaken but unharmed, and for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes that looked like the person I'd grown up with. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for doing the right thing," I replied. Finally. Outside the building, Patricia Morrison was coordinating with state investigators, providing them with the evidence her team had compiled over the past weeks. Marcus Webb was debriefing his security personnel and ensuring that everything had been properly documented. "Is it really over?" I asked Patricia as we watched Drew being loaded into a police transport vehicle. The arrests are just the beginning, she said. We've got enough evidence to dismantle his entire network, but it's going to take time. Drew had connections everywhere, and rooting out all the corruption is going to be a long process. What about my business? The licensing board complaint? The regulatory investigations? All of that will be dropped once the evidence of Drew's manipulation comes to light. Your reputation will be restored, and you'll probably be eligible for damages from the civil lawsuits. I watched the police vehicles disappear into the night, carrying Drew and his associates toward what would hopefully be long prison sentences. The immediate threat was over, but I knew the aftermath would bring its own challenges. "Grant," Silas said, walking up beside me. "I know I can't undo what I did, can't take back the months of betrayal and cowardice, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making it right." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to testify against Drew and everyone else in his network. I'm going to help the investigators understand how the whole operation worked, and I'm going to find a way to make amends for what I did to you and your business." I looked at my brother, seeing genuine remorse and determination in his expression. Maybe people really could change. Maybe redemption was possible, even after the worst kinds of betrayal. "We'll figure it out," I said, "together." As dawn broke over the city, I realized that this wasn't an ending so much as a beginning. Drew's network had been exposed, but rebuilding trust and repairing the damage would take time. My marriage to Nora was still over, my business still needed to recover from months of sabotage, and my relationship with Silas would require years of work to fully heal. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The truth was finally coming to light, and the people who had manipulated and betrayed me were facing consequences for their actions. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when this all started, but it was an ending I could live with. And sometimes, that's enough.